Certainly, there are a number of attorneys here at the White House, and they review these matters, but ultimately the president looks at each of these cases individually and makes that decision as he has the right to do so. Take one last question. Eamon?
Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to ask you about the president's call today with Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who said that the president's tariffs on the EU were, quote, unjustified and deeply disappointing, according to the British readout of their phone call today. That's what she said to the president. How did the president respond to that?
The president feels very confident in his decision and will continue to make sure that the unfair trade practices that have gone on for decades do not continue, and that he's protecting the interest of American workers and American businesses. Thanks, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
I love a long briefing sometimes here.
Well, it's one of those days when you just don't know what to do, because we have two things put out as truth, and they're opposites. And as a result of the fact that they're opposites, one of them is untrue. First, from the Fox News deck, the president's lawyers versus the president's press secretary. The president's lawyers have contradicted the White House about whether President Trump indeed dictated his oldest son's statements about the Trump Tower meeting with Russians offering dirt on Hillary Clinton. Remember, that wasn't the first story on that meeting. The first story on that meeting, just wait. The first story on that meeting was it's about adoptions. And then we got a statement that was lacking in facts. And now they say the word from the lawyers of the president is the president's own lawyers who issued a memo stating definitively that the president dictated Donald Trump Jr.'s statement. That's according to the letter that Fox News obtained from the president's own legal team, a letter that was sent to the special counsel Robert Mueller way back in January. Trump Jr.'s first statement said the sit-down with a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin was actually about adoption, and left out any mention of trying to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Last summer, the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, said President Trump did not write his son's response.
He certainly didn't dictate, but, like I said, he weighed in, offered suggestion like any father would do.
So that's the one story. But the lawyer to the president of the United States says something else. The lawyer says that Robert Mueller, that the lawyers told Robert Mueller that the president dictated the statement, which Sarah Sanders just said it didn't dictate, but which Sarah Sanders says she can't comment on the words of the outside counsel. Today, the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, told reporters to ask the lawyers about the discrepancy. Well, the lawyers have said that the president dictated the letter. Well, what difference does it really make? What happened way back in the day? It makes a lot of difference. One of those lawyers also denied that the president helped write the statement at all.
That was written, no, that was written by Donald Trump Jr. and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer. The president didn't sign off on anything. He was coming back from the G20. The statement that was released on Saturday was released by Donald Trump Jr., and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyers. The president wasn't involved in that. Well, I do want to be clear that the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement. It came from Donald Trump Jr. So that's what I can tell you, because that's what we know. And again, Donald Trump Jr. has said the same thing, that it was in fact from him, and I believe it was his lawyer was in consultation. I'm sure his lawyer was in consultation.
Jay Sekulow, president's lawyer. Another lawyer for the president says Sekulow was uninformed when he made those statements, and that actually the president did indeed dictate the memo back in the day, just as they said in the memo to the special counsel in January. Let's get to John Roberts, who's at the White House. Not really sure what to do with this, John, because the lawyers say one thing, the White House press secretary says another. It's one of those days where somebody's lying. Maybe we're not entirely sure who it is.
Well, let me just point out that there has been a change in Jay Sekulow's thinking as well. The statement that you just played there from Jay Sekulow was July 12, 2017. This letter was sent on January the 29th, 2018 to Robert Mueller, and the letter was written by by Jay Sekulow and his assistants. So Jay Sekulow said back in July that the president didn't dictate it, and then he and his assistants write the 20-page memo that was delivered to Robert Mueller on January the 29th saying he did, in fact, dictate that. You pointed out that Sarah Huckabee Sanders didn't have anything to say about it today. The communications and press teams here have taken pains to try to wall themselves off from this Russia investigation, though it's a legitimate question to ask Sarah Sanders, look, you said one thing, and now somebody's saying something different. What was it that informed your first statement? She wouldn't go there, though. But let's bring up the quote from that 20-page letter that led us into all of this. Jay Sekulow and John Dowd in this letter writing, quote, "You have received all of the notes, communications, and testimony indicating that the president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son, Donald Trump Jr. His son then followed up by making a full public disclosure regarding the meeting, including his public testimony that there was nothing to the meeting and certainly no evidence of collusion." As you can imagine, a reaction to all of this is flowing in fast and furious. Adam Schiff tweeting, quote, "First, we're told that there were no meetings with the Russians. Then we're told Trump had no part in drafting the false Trump Tower statement. Then we're told he weighed in. Now we're told he dictated it. Not a word can be trusted of Trump or his staff on Russia or perhaps anything." And if you go back to that 20-page memo, Shep, Jay Sekulow and John Dowd argue that this is a private matter between the president and the New York Times because that statement was to the New York Times in response to an article that they were writing about that June 9th, 2016 meeting. John Dowd and Sekulow insisting that the special counsel has no business asking any questions about what happened in a private matter between the president and the New York Times regarding his children. When you look at that letter in totality, it's building a big case, at least from the point of view of the president's legal team, for why Robert Mueller should not get a sit-down interview with the president. Shep?
All right, John, thank you. Thank you. We'll be back to you in a minute because there's lots more news. Let's bring in Peter Nicholas, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. How are we supposed to process this?
Well, you've got a discrepancy that the White House seems unwilling to clear up. So you have the lawyers saying one thing about that Trump Tower meeting and how it came about. And you have Sarah Sanders not willing to comment on it, which creates a bit of a credibility crisis, I think, for the White House. A credibility crisis? Yeah, I think that... because somebody's lying to us? Well, it's a discrepancy that the White House is so far... If one person says one thing and another person says another thing on the exact same matter that are opposites, somebody's not telling the truth. I mean, we clearly don't like using this word, but it seems to be... I mean, these inconsistencies seem to be among the most consistent things that we live with now. Well, that's right. And it is right. It's up to the White House to clear this up. And you have the memo leaked out. Lawyers were saying, have said one thing about it. They said... The president dictated that statement. Sarah Sanders said something different in her briefing, and she wasn't willing to address it at that hearing. Until she does, these questions are going to persist. And a basic question that she has to answer is, does she stand by that statement? And until she answers it, these questions are going to continue, and there's going to be a cloud over the White House. Well, it would be weird if the lawyer for the president, when speaking to the man who could subpoena him, or couldn't, says to that counsel something that could get him in trouble but wasn't true. I mean, help our viewers understand why it's important if the president, as his lawyers say, dictated that memo, that it contained all of those arguably falsehoods. Well, because it's important because if the president dictated it and the statement isn't accurate and the president is saying it was about adoptions, the meeting in Trump Tower was about adoptions, when in fact his members of his campaign were, and his son Don Jr. was trying to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. From Russians. From Russians. Right, from Russians. And that's what the lie was about. They were trying to get dirt on the campaign of Hillary Clinton's campaign from the Russians who were in the room. They forgot that. In the beginning, nobody mentioned the Russians initially. Then they wrote a memo saying it was actually about adoptions, and now they meant that no, it really was about dirt on Hillary Clinton, except Sarah Sanders isn't admitting that. Well, the question is, can we rely on the president, can we rely on the White House to give us accurate information about legitimate questions that were asked? So we're told by the lawyers in this memo that the president dictated the statement. The statement was not accurate. It was misleading. And, you know, the public and the press are genuinely asking for answers to explain that, and we're not getting them right now. Yeah. And until that happens, there's a credibility problem that it's not going to go away. Frustrating? Frustrating for all of us, Shep.
Peter Nicholas from the Wall Street Journal, which is owned with